So my guest today is Chris Delaney, an interview coach who specializes in helping career professionals overcome job interview fears and is the author of What is Your Interview Identity? Chris, welcome. Thanks for making time today.
Jeff, thank you for having me down here. I'm very excited to be in your show today.
Oh, I'm hoping so, because we're going to bring some good stuff out. So let me ask you a question to launch this. Why do people fail on interviews?
There's two reasons why people fail job interviews. One is the lack of practice, because people are scared of job interviews, so don't practice, don't prepare, and don't get ready. They want to avoid thinking about their job interview. And secondly, is it's something that we don't do on a regular basis, so we don't really know how to sell ourselves.
It's amazing. Every great athlete in the world practices, every great entertainer rehearses. Job hunters go on interviews. The first time the words come out of their mouth are at the interview, and they wonder, how did this go wrong? I don't understand.
Repetition is the master of learning any skill. You've got to do it over and over and over again to become skilled at that particular task. And job interviews are no different.
Now, we're going to spend a little time talking about mind reading, understanding what interviewers look for. And by the way, he's a hypnotist as well, but that's a side part of the conversation. So we're going to understand what they're looking for, what their thought process is like, and what their, here we come, unconscious biases show up in the course of the interview. So first of all, let's define the term. What's an unconscious bias?
It's really interesting you talk about hypnotherapy. To be honest, you don't need to listen to this show. Just become a hypnotherapist, click your fingers, and the interviewer will give you that job.
It's a concept, but not one I don't think many people are going to follow up on.
No. So in the job, in real life, everyday situations, we have unconscious bias at play all the time in our mind, but we're just not aware of these things. Our beliefs, our opinion, our prejudice come from our own experience, the things we value, and the things that we believe in. So when you meet someone for the first time, or when an interviewer meets the potential employee for the first time, they'll make an instant opinion about the applicant. Now, you'll read the books and it'll say it takes 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds to make that first impression. It's not. It's straight away. You meet someone and you have a likability factor. I like that person or I don't like that person based on a numerous amount of unconscious biases.
It's funny. And people size one another up. That's the polite way of saying unconscious bias. And what I've told people to do on interviews is as soon as you meet someone, size them up as a person. Because 95% of the time, your instincts about them are right. Because the alternative is people paralyze their personality and they start feeling out the other person. I'm not a big believer in feeling it out because by the time you're done feeling them out, the interview's over.
This is what happens from the employer's point of view as well. Like they meet you for the first time and they size you up, but it's often at the subconscious level. So if I was meeting you, Jeff, for the first time, like I might make an opinion because you're wearing a baseball cap or because you got grey in your beard or you're wearing glasses or the clothes that you're wearing. Or I might make an opinion because of your size, because of your gender, because of your potential age, or because of the energy you bring when you talk. Because when you talk, Jeff, you bring so much energy. So depending on how I meet you, visually, auditory, I'll get an instant opinion about you. When you bring all that together, that creates another opinion about someone. A great example of this is, I don't know if you find me attractive or not, Jeff. I can see no comment. There's an unconscious bias called what is beautiful is good. So we find people who we perceive attractive as being more confident, having better social skills. We've got more empathy with that person. So we kind of want that attractive person to do better in the job interview compared to a non-attractive person.
It's funny. When I talk about what firms look for when they hire, I tell people competence is only one thing they look for. Self-confidence, character, chemistry, maybe a little bit of charisma, because charismatic people always do better, right?
Yeah.
And that someone shows that they care and they want to do a good job, all of which add up to we trust someone. by our own definition of trust. Is that what you find, or do you have something different that you think people look for when they hire?
So you have like a couple of stages. You had the unconscious bias stage. So I meet you and I make an instant opinion about you. Then that opinion, that emotional feeling will influence my behavior, which then affects the applicant's behavior. So if I find someone attractive, I think they're really charismatic, they're really confident, we've got things in common, then I'm going to want that person to do well in the interview. So subconsciously, I then search for behaviors that make, so I look for reasons why I want to hire that person compared to if I didn't like that individual at the beginning. So if I was sexist, ageist, racist, any of the isms, I would then subconsciously search for evidence why that person is not suitable. But what we find is most people have this unconscious bias. We're kind of aware that unconscious bias happens. So we don't want that to be an influencing factor in the job interview. And this is where the interview identity comes in, because if someone is charismatic and confident in the job interview, but they can like reference, sector models and theories, use the industry acronyms, and can talk about the business as usual tasks without having to think a load of perfect examples. It just comes out natural. The employee will perceive them as having a high level of knowledge and experience and a high level of confidence. So that creates an identity where I want to employ that person because I can see what value they add to the team, compared to someone who, I don't know, maybe has got lots of industry experience, but no confidence. So we know that we know there's something about them that maybe, they got a skill set, but we just can't offer them a job because they don't score high enough on the interview scorecard. Or someone who's really confident, but with no experience. They talk the talk, but we know they're not going to be able to walk the walk if we employ that person. So you have unconscious bias.
Believe it. Because they may, but we don't believe it.
That's it. And what happens as well, when you think someone's being deceitful, then that becomes a blocker in our head. Like if we think that person's lying to us, then every answer we're analysing to go, is that a deceit? Is that a lie? They're fibbing about that, particular example. If you give the employers doubt, then that'll be their frame of reference for the rest of that job interview. So you have the unconscious bias, which is I like you or I don't like you at a very basic level. But in a job interview, because the interviewer is analysing your answers against, a set of scoring criteria, and they kind of want you to do well because out of 250 applications, you and 6 other people are being interviewed. So they kind of want you to do well. So they're looking for evidence that you have the skill set that they require. Now, if you blow that at the beginning, they just stop looking for that employability part of you. Whereas they want you, if they can see something in you, like you've got this strong identity, they're willing you to do better in that job interview.
I agree. No question about it. There is this confirmation bias where people look for confirmation of their opinion, and their interview questions are easier, or they hand things over to people. Like I remember in the book you talking about when job applicants know the actual target for the job, they tend to do better than when they don't. So they may be being interviewed, but the hiring manager tells them what they're looking for, versus I read a job description, versus I just got an interview, and guess who does the worst? The latter. And thus, knowing what the target is a big part of this. Now, I want to start talking with you about techniques for performing well on interviews. So that this way, people know the target and how to conduct themselves for the particular audience that they're meeting with. So let's start with the first one. What ways can people use to connect with the interviewer to perform well?
So you can use the unconscious bias to make a positive impression of yourself. So we all know that people like other people who are like themselves. So if we got commonality, then we'll like each other. So we're both quite energetic, Jeff. We're both into like helping people to be successful. We've both got a background helping people in job interviews. So we already will have like a natural bit of empathy. So if you can find commonality with the interviewer, they're more likely to then like you in return. So a couple of ways you can do this is just check social media. And if someone's into tennis or the theatre or rock climbing or reading books or whatever they are that person is into, you can then bring that up during the small talk in the interview and they'll start liking you straight away. This is the same as having the old school tie. Do you remember when people used to say, you always get a job if you wear your old school tie? This is because people who went to the same school have that in common. Any type of commonality, the research shows, will make someone has more empathy with you. So that's, as an example, is having a similar sounding name. So if I was called Chris and Jeffy was called Christopher or Christine, that similar sounding name will help us build rapport. Same, we got shared interests, being from the same town, same ethnic group, the same age, band. Anything in common will help you have rapport. Building on that, if you tell someone that you like that person, they're more likely to like you in return. This happens in attraction all the time as well. So if you actually want to date someone, tell that person that you fancy them, and they're more likely to then fancy you in return. I don't know why I keep bringing up that I'm attractive and dating and stuff, but it's come up several times already in this very short interview.
Well, it's funny. One of the examples I give is how often interviewing is like blind dates, because you're going to meet, you've been told something about one another that you hope is true, and you were supposed to be introduced by someone, and instead what happens is they say, I'm going to be late. Why don't the two of you get acquainted? And then there's this forced environment that causes people to start to have conversations. To me, that's really what interviewing is like, this contrived environment where people have to get to know one another, ostensibly with an eye toward evaluating someone, their suitability for employment. Ostensibly, ostensibly, but not always. So what I heard you talking about, in NLP terms, neuro-linguistic programming is very much like matching and mirroring, but I didn't hear you talk about copying behaviors. I heard you talk about looking for commonality between you and the other person, the interviewer, and thus connecting with them on that level. So I just want to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah. So that first technique is just about having that rapport with that person by having common interests and shared factors about yourself. Like the mirror matching technique is very good. So for people who don't know that, if your interviewer leans back, you can lean back. If they talk really fast, you can talk really fast. You kind of copy what that person's doing. And the idea is that two people who are mirroring and matching each other will then build rapport because of that commonality. People who are naturally in friendship groups do this all the time. So think about your group of friends and think about the common language you use when you're all talking. The natural charismatic person in your friendship group is quite likely the person who first used that language, that jargon or that metaphor that you all now use in a joking fashion. You'll see it when you're dating with your long-term partner. When you're in a very loving relationship, you'll do things in a very similar way. You'll copy each other's mannerisms. They always say that people look like the dogs, don't they?
This
is all based on the matching and mirroring. So the idea is that you naturally do it when you're in rapport, but to build rapport, you can then copy the interviewer's behavior. I don't talk about that too much because it's quite a hard one to do in a 45-minute job interview. What's a lot easier to do and has the same effect is copying the language and the words that the interviewer uses. So this is really good when you're jumping from one job sector to another one. So if you're a project manager coming from construction and you're going into project management, but in, I don't know, education as an example, the jargon that you use, your acronyms that you use will be very different. So if you start using the words your interview uses, you start building a level of language. But more importantly, you find that people, we call it meta in NLP terms, you find that people have these meta language patterns. And it's all based on how that person is motivated or how that person is stressed. So as an example, a really common motivational factor is people are motivated by getting away from pain or towards pleasure. And if you're motivated by getting away from pain, you'll use language that represents that. So you might, as an example, a manager might say to their team members, like, we're going to do this new project because if we don't do it, we won't make enough money, we'll all lose our jobs, and then we'll all be redundant. So that's like pain-related motivation. Where a pleasure towards person, so we call it towards and away motivation. So a pleasure person going towards pleasure will use that language. So let's do this new project because we'll hit our targets, we'll get bonuses, and we'll have a great work-life balance. So it's the same outcome, but different language. So if you can copy and mirror the language patterns that the interviewer uses, you'll have a natural rapport because you'll speak the same language. You'll have the same visualizations in your mindset.
And it's interesting. You mentioned earlier in your answer the use of acronyms. The same terms that the interviewer uses, and especially when you're doing a career change, they don't know if you can communicate their way. And this just breaks down one of the subtle obstacles that exists in them considering whether to hire you. And he speaks our language. Yeah, she gets it. And thus, what they're able to do is see right away that you know how they talk. And thus, there's no roadblock of that there.
Yeah.
And then you went on to some other great stuff. And sorry, I'm having these pop-ups show up on my screen. I apologize. But you went on to some other great stuff, talking not just simply about mirroring and matching, but real connection on a deeper level that allows people to feel as though you hear them, you understand them. You're even in a 45-minute interview, you can copy the language, copy the mannerisms as you speak. Now, for example, folks, I'm speaking with my hands today. And there are times on interviews where you can do much the same thing if the interviewer is doing it too. And it just demonstrates a certain level of energy that translates well in their thinking. Did I have that right?
Yeah, perfect. Because cultures in companies are created through the stories that the workplace tells themselves, which are based on the language. So an energetic, high, fast speaking, energetic boss kind of will want that culture. So you got that same personality, they'll want you as part of their organization, especially when you can say that you got these, you meet the essential criteria for the job spec, you got a unique selling point, and you got industry experience and qualifications, you got the logical information that they need, you tick all the boxes for them, but you also got the personality that they want, compared to an interviewer who's a little bit more slow with their pace and a little bit more calm and a bit more, maybe logical in their language. You just got to copy and use the language that they're using and use their pace of their voice, their tonality, their gestures. Mirror and matching is just copying everything about that person to build a natural rapport.
And I think it's interesting. I'm glad you went to the more reserved individual, the introvert, the analytical personality. And this is information for you folks, not just simply for executing well on the interview, but to understand what the work environment is going to be like. An analytical person will probably have analytical team members around them and perhaps more introverted. And you should know that. I'm sure you'll meet some of them in the course of the interview process, but take note of these things because it's information for you. Do you work well with big, loud personalities? Do you prefer something calmer? Whatever is fine. Makes no difference, but you should know what you're stepping into.
This is so important because one of the biggest problems about passing a job interview is most career professionals wait until what they see a life and death situation. So they're sick of the job, it's making them stress, or they're not getting enough money, or whatever barrier they're facing in work. So they're in like a painful situation, and like to get out of it, I will go and get this new job. And when they're in the recruitment process, they make it like a life and death. So if I don't get this new job, I'm going to have to stay with the one I hate. I'm going to be stressed. I'll take that stress out of my family, or not got enough money. Yeah, they stab themselves in the heart. Where if you can imagine applying for a job when you're totally happy in the workplace, you've got a great boss, a great salary, you're doing the job that you love, it's the ideal job. But at the same time, every so often, you just put out applications, go to job interviews, and if you don't get it, you don't really care because you got this perfect job. Your mindset going into that interview is completely different. So when you're in a job you love, you're actually interviewing the interviewer, aren't you? Because you're thinking, I'm in a job I love, so what are you, as the interviewer, as the employer, what are you going to offer me that will make me want to work for you? I've got the experience, the qualifications, and the personality. So why should I switch jobs? So what is your culture of your company? What do you value? What is your vision? What are the benefits for working in your employment? It's a massive reframe of how you think about the job interview. And this is what I always talk about when I do careers advice. I always tell people constantly be looking for work. We live in an era now where you don't have a job for life. You don't get the golden watch at the end of your career. You don't work for the same employer for 50 years. Most people will have 3 careers in their lifetime and will job hop every 3 to 5 years, especially millennials. Millennials, with the great resignation and stuff, they'll drop jobs at the flick of a hat. And if you're very skilled at interviewing as well, if you're like the first choice applicant, the person who always gets job offers, you're always in demand, and it's dead easy for that individual to get job offers. So apply for positions when you're in a place of power. You don't need that job.
The person who gets ahead isn't always the smartest. They don't always work the hardest, although those are great qualities to have. People get ahead by being alert to opportunity. Sometimes they're internal to the organization. More often they're not, they're external. And like in dating, when you're in a dating situation and you just don't care, you tend to conduct yourself in a more open and honest kind of way. You're more authentic and less guarded. And thus you can figure out whether the other person, male or female, likes you for who you are and not because of an act that you put on. And the act is one of the reasons why I believe job hunters and employers exaggerate in hiring. After all, we all know job hunters always overstate what they're capable of doing. And having worked in search for as long as I did, one of the great realizations I had is I'd never heard of an employer ever say to a job hunter, Chris, I've got a problem. I've inherited a team of imbeciles. And my predecessor got fired, and so did hers. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out, I got to deliver or I'm out the door too. And they all talk about a great opportunity with a terrific team of people. We're like family around here. And they never talk about what the real problems are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what we're finding now is, so the employers use a structured job interview. So for people who don't know what that is, it's they ask the same 8 questions to the same 6 or 7 applicants in the same order, and they score you often on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being the worst answer and 4 being the best. And the interview panel will have examples answers for each one of those scores. So an example answer for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the research shows that that's the most best way to recruit high performing teams, because it's more logical than emotional, but our unconscious bias and the interview identities all affect the funnel we use.
And it tends to remove bias from the process, because minimally everyone's asked the same thing to start off with.
Yes, yeah, that's it. So we call it the structured job interview, but most people hear it as behavioral job interviews and situational job interviews. So behavioral interviews are questions framed on your past experience. Give me an example of doing this. Tell me about a time you did this. And situational job interviews are future-based. So they're really good for like new sectors, employing graduates and stuff. What would you do in this situation? How would you handle this particular situation? But what employers are moving to more now, or embedding into that job interview process, is values job interview questions and strength-based job interview questions. So what they're looking for is to find out a bit about how that person's motivated, what their work ethic is like, how their temperament would fit into the culture. So they'll ask questions like, do you work better working in a team or working on your own initiative? As an example, do you work better starting jobs or finishing tasks? So they ask these questions where there's not a right and wrong answer. It's about understanding how you as the applicant work best. And what they do is take that and match it to the culture of their organization. So do we need starters or do we need finishers? Do we need someone who focuses on one thing or can manage multiple projects? Do we need extrovert people or introvert people? Do we need creative people or logical people? And we all know, like, the best teams are a bit of a mix, but they ask these questions to work out, would that person be motivated in our organization? Because a motivated person is more likely to stay with the company for a longer duration of time.
It's interesting because using those examples, of course, there's no right or wrong answer. And if you really need a job, think about the job description. How has it been described to you? They're talking about delivery and implementation. I think they want finishers. If they're talking about designing a campaign too, I think they're looking for a creative type. So, as an old comedian said, give them what they want. Tell them what they want. and you'll do it.
Yeah.
So, if you need a job, that's the way to play it. If you're looking for the right job, you give them the honest answer, because that's going to serve you best over the long term. Because one of the statistics I've seen is within 6 months of a person joining, 30% of them think they made a mistake. And on the employer side, within 18 months, 60% of them regret the decision they made to hire someone. 60%.
It's massive that, and the 30% stat is because we're in that life and death situation. So we're desperate to get out of a job, so we take anything, because it's better than what I'm in now. The grass is always greener on the other side. Where career professionals who are first choice applicants, they don't do that. They apply when they're in a place of happiness. So they naturally ask more questions throughout the job interview. There's basically 3 rules to pass a job interview. Rule number one is identify the job criteria. So that's like the essential criteria in the job spec, reading the advert, understanding the culture, the values of that organization. Because if you can only ask you 8 questions, they're going to ask you 8 questions based on the things that they deem are really, really important. So you can predict that and then predict the interview questions. Rule number 2 is be a self-promoter. Oh my God, like this. So my clients are often people with high levels of knowledge and experience. So they've been in the industry 10, 15, 20 years, but they just fail to get up new jobs. So they're so knowledgeable, they're experts, they're doing things that other people in the industry can't do, but they can't get another job because they don't promote themselves. And this often comes down to your confidence, by the way. So the research shows if you're confident, you're more likely to talk about your strengths and your successes. Where if you are filled with anxiety, you self-disclose weaknesses. So you might get asked a question like, what are your strengths? And someone with a low level of self-worth will go, what are my strengths? Well, I'm not very good at this thing. And I do struggle doing that other thing. But my strength, I suppose, is, so they disclose a couple of weaknesses before talking about a strength. Someone who's, highly confident doesn't do that. Straight out the gate, as soon as they're asked a question, they're saying, I'm great, I'm wonderful, man, amazing. You need me. These are my 7 unique selling points. So you need to be a self-promoter. And then the 3rd rule is a bit like you do, Jeff, actually. Communicate with confidence. Like Jeff's voice is amazing and it's full of energy, full of power. If you meet Jeff in person, you can imagine his presence Jeff has. So you don't need to be as extrovert and energized as Jeff in the job interview, even though for some jobs that's amazing. But you do need to be confident. You do need to use that positive language. You do need to use the pause. You do need to ask questions. The research shows as well, when they did some data on this, is the more confident you are, the more number of words you use per interview answer. So the more confident you are, the more you talk, basically. That's what the research shows. And the more you talk, the more you hit the job criteria. So it's dead easy, isn't it?
And it's funny, I've often found that there's more power in fewer words.
Well, yes. But the difference is in a job interview is, so when you got someone who's nervous and they get asked, tell me about, I don't know, how you handled this project. They tend to go, well, we had this project and we did these 3 things and then this was the outcome. Someone who's confident will explain it in more detail. So they'll say, well, the way I manage projects is using Prince 2 project management methodology, which is these 5 steps. An example of me doing this is blah, 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 blah. And they'll often talk as well about their thought process. So, I had 2 options, option A and option B. So I looked at the positive and negative, and then they describe those positives and negatives. The answers are more descriptive, which makes them more longer. But what often happens as well, if you're anxious and using less words per interview answer, you miss out loads of essential criteria. And in a black and white sense, if the employer doesn't hear you saying A, B, and C, they can't tick it off on the interview scorecard. So you can't get those 3 or 4 interview score ratings.
Interesting. What haven't we covered yet that we really should, Chris?
So how to become confident in the job interview is dead easy, by the way. So a couple of dead easy tips. So one, just practice. We talked about that straight at the beginning. Practicing can be, I don't know, with an interview coach, just applying for loads of jobs. So you're doing lots more interviews. Doing public speaking is a great one. Improv as well, like getting asked improv questions and getting you to think on your feet. So that's kind of one way, just practice. The second way, though, is more about your self-worth, because most of us feel like we're imposters. We suffer from imposter syndrome. We're in this position and we think, I'm in this job, but I'm kind of just getting away with it. I make mistakes here and there. And if someone like analyzes what I'll do, they realize that I'm not as good as I am. And when you're applying for a new job, you think the new employer will be able to see through this veil. So we live in this imposter syndrome. So you had to realize how great you are. So one way to do that is, hopefully if you are a good employee, is reread your past appraisals from your managers. So go through your past appraisals and look at what's the commonality, like out of all your managers and all your past employers, what is it that they say you're good at all the time? Did they all talk about you being creative or being analytical? They all talk about you being, a leader or a team member. Like, what are those skills and qualities that keep coming through all the time? Also think about different projects or teams or companies that you've been in, and what is your identity in those teams? Like, are you the ideas person? Are you the person who just gets things done? Do you always meet the deadlines? Like, start analyzing what you're good at, because being having imposter syndrome is a generic thing that we say to ourselves. We use generalizations, don't we? I'm rubbish. That's like, rubbish at what? I do a billion things in a day. Turn that around. What specific am I good at?
That is fabulous and great advice for you folks, because the reality is you're world class at a lot of different things, but we tend to zero in on the things that we're not good at. I think that's part of human nature. We criticize ourselves and we hold on to those opinions like they're true. Yeah. And we change, we adapt. What you're bad at when you were 14 is not what you're probably bad at today. So give it up.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Like wake yourself up. Like, we hold on to these identities from, like you said, when we're 14. Like, you're not that person anymore. If you're 40 or 50, you're a completely different person. Like, which our personalities change, don't they, every 10 years. So you need to wake up to who you are and what the employer values about you. And if you've got weaknesses, because we all have weaknesses, you can develop those, can't you? But you need to be aware of your strengths and talk about those unique selling points during the job interview process, because that's what the self-promoters do. They only focus on what they offer to the employer, not what they need to improve on.
Right. We don't have to offer it up so we're on a silver platter with beautiful accoutrements. Let them figure it out over time. You're getting better all the time. Give it up. It's not the most important thing in your life. Chris, this has been fabulous. How can people find out more about you, the book, the work that you do, everything? How can people follow you?
So the book is in every bookshop and every online bookshop. So what is your interview identity? And it's based on like loads of research. So all the advice in there is based on some academic research that I was reviewing through COVID. My website is employmentking.co.uk. So that's employmentking.co.uk. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me on there. I always post job interview tips on LinkedIn.
Chris, this has been fabulous. Thank you. And folks, we'll be back soon with more. Hope you found today's interview helpful. If you did, you're watching on YouTube, click the like button, share it, do something that lets people know it was worthwhile. Also, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IN/The Big Game Hunter. Mention that you saw the interview, because I like knowing I'm helping some folks. And your network will be a lot bigger if you connect with me. Visit my website, thebiggamehunter.us, where I've got thousands of posts on the blog you can watch, listen to, or read. That'll help you with your search. Also, while you're there, you can schedule time for coaching with me, find out about my courses, books, and guides. There's just a lot of great information there. So I just want to conclude by saying, I hope you have a terrific day. And most importantly, be great. Take care.